Johnny Carson never went silent. In 25 years of hosting The Tonight Show, through technical difficulties, awkward guests, and bombing jokes, Johnny always had something to say. Until October 23, 1987, his producer, Fred de Cordova, walked onto the stage during a live broadcast, something that had never happened, and handed Johnny a folded piece of paper. Johnny read it. His face went white. The smile disappeared completely. For 11 seconds, he said nothing, just stared at the note. The audience started to worry. Ed McMahon stood up from his desk, and when Johnny finally spoke, his voice was shaking. "Ladies and gentlemen, I need to step away for a moment." He walked off stage, still holding the note, leaving 15 million viewers wondering what could possibly make Johnny Carson abandon his show. It was a Friday night at NBC Studio One in Burbank, California. The Tonight Show was taping the last episode before a week-long break. Johnny had been in a good mood all evening. The monologue had killed. The first guest, actress Goldie Hawn, had been charming and funny. Now Johnny was settling in for the second segment, ready to introduce comedian Steve Martin. Fred Cordova sat in the production booth monitoring everything as he always did. He'd been producing The Tonight Show since 1970, 17 years of working alongside Johnny Carson. He knew Johnny's rhythms, his preferences, his boundaries. One of those boundaries was sacred. Never interrupt during taping unless someone is dying. The phone in the production booth rang. Fred's assistant answered it, listened for a moment, then covered the receiver with her hand. Her face had gone pale. "Fred, it's Johnny's ex-wife, Joanne. She says it's urgent about Ricky." Fred's stomach dropped. Ricky Carson was Johnny's middle son, 39 years old, a photographer who'd struggled with the weight of being Johnny Carson's child. Fred took the phone. "Joanne, Fred, there's been an accident." Joanne's voice was shaking. Ricky was driving on the Pacific Coast Highway. His car went off the road. "They're taking him to UCLA Medical Center right now. I don't know how bad it is. They won't tell me anything over the phone. Johnny needs to know. He needs to get to the hospital." Fred looked through the glass at Johnny, who was laughing at something Goldie Hawn had just said. In about 30 seconds, Johnny's world was going to collapse. "I'll tell him," Fred said. "We'll get him there." Fred grabbed a piece of paper and wrote quickly. "Ricky car accident. Pacific Coast Highway, UCLA Medical Center. Need to go now?" He folded it and stood up. His legs felt unsteady. In 17 years, he'd never walked onto that stage during taping. But there was no choice. The director saw Fred heading for the stage door. "Fred, what are you doing? We're live in 2 minutes." "I don't care," Fred said. "Keep rolling." Fred walked onto the stage. The audience saw him first and started murmuring. This wasn't normal. Johnny was in the middle of saying something to Goldie when he noticed the audience's attention shift. He turned and saw Fred approaching. Johnny's smile disappeared immediately. Fred Cordova walking onto the stage during taping meant something catastrophic had happened. Johnny stood up, microphone still clipped to his jacket. "Fred," Johnny said, his voice already tight with worry. Fred didn't say anything. He just handed Johnny the folded paper. Their eyes met for a second, and Fred's expression told Johnny everything he needed to know. This was bad. Johnny opened the note with shaking hands. His eyes scanned the words once. Then again the color drained from his face. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. The studio, which had been buzzing with confused audience chatter, went completely silent. 11 seconds. Johnny Carson stood there for 11 seconds without moving, without speaking, without acknowledging anything around him. The cameras were still rolling. 15 million people were watching. But Johnny Carson, the man who'd built a career on perfect timing and never missing a beat, was frozen. Ed McMahon stood up from his desk. He could see Johnny's hands trembling. "Johnny," Ed said gently. The sound of Ed's voice seemed to break whatever spell had frozen Johnny. He looked up from the note, first at Ed, then at the audience, then at the cameras. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Ladies and gentlemen, I need to step away for a moment." He unclipped his microphone, handed it to Fred, and walked off stage. No explanation, no joke to ease the tension. He just left. The audience sat in stunned silence. Goldie Hawn had tears in her eyes, though she didn't know why. The director cut to commercial immediately, but backstage, chaos had erupted. Johnny was already pulling off his jacket, heading for the exit. Fred caught up with him. "I've got a car waiting. I'll drive you." "My son," Johnny said, his voice breaking. "Is he alive? Did Joanne say if he's alive?" She didn't know. They're taking him to UCLA. That's all she could tell me. Johnny nodded, moving on autopilot. Ed McMahon appeared. I'm coming with you, Ed. You don't have to. I'm coming with you, Ed said firmly. You're not doing this alone. The three men rushed out the back exit where Fred's car was waiting. As Fred drove through Burbank toward Westwood, Johnny sat in the back seat, staring at nothing. Ed sat beside him, not saying anything, just being present. I haven't talked to him in 3 months, Johnny said suddenly. We had a fight about nothing important. I can't even remember what it was about. I was supposed to call him back. I kept meaning to call him back. You'll talk to him at the hospital, Fred said, trying to sound confident. You'll work it out. What if I don't get the chance? Johnny's voice cracked. What if the last thing I said to him was angry? What if that's how it ends? Ed put his hand on Johnny's shoulder. Don't think like that. Not yet. The drive to UCLA Medical Center normally took 30 minutes. Fred made it in 18, running red lights and praying no cops would stop them. Johnny sat rigid in the back seat, that note still clutched in his hand. They rushed into the emergency room. Joanne Carson was already there pacing near the nurse's station. When she saw Johnny, she ran to him. They'd been divorced for years, but in that moment, they were just two parents terrified for their son. What do you know? Johnny asked. His car went off the cliff near Point Doom, Joanne said, her voice shaking. Someone saw it happen, called 911. They had to use ropes to get down to him. Johnny, the car rolled 3 times before it hit the rocks. Johnny's knees almost gave out. Ed grabbed his arm to steady him. A doctor approached them. Mr. and Mrs. Carson? Yes, Johnny said immediately. How is he? Is he alive? Your son is alive, the doctor said. And both Johnny and Joanne let out sounds that were half sob, half relief. But he's in critical condition. Multiple fractures, internal bleeding, severe head trauma. We're taking him into surgery now. It's going to be several hours. I need you to prepare yourselves. The next 24 hours will determine everything. Can I see him? Johnny asked before the surgery. The doctor hesitated, then nodded. 2 minutes. He's not conscious. Johnny and Joanne followed the doctor to a trauma bay. What they saw made Joanne turn away, crying. Ricky was barely recognizable. His face was swollen and bruised, tubes everywhere, machines beeping, bandages covering most of his body. Johnny walked to the bedside slowly. He took his son's hand carefully, trying not to disturb the 4 lines. Ricky, he whispered. It's Dad. I'm here. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry about the fight. I'm sorry I didn't call. I'm here now and I'm not leaving. You hear me? I'm not leaving. Ricky didn't respond. The ventilator breathed for him. The monitors beeped their steady rhythm. Mr. Carson, the doctor said gently. We need to take him now. Johnny nodded. He leaned down and kissed his son's forehead. I love you, he whispered. Please don't leave me. Please. They wheeled Ricky away toward the surgical wing. Johnny and Joanne stood in the empty trauma bay, both crying. Fred and Ed waited respectfully at a distance. The surgery took 6 hours. Johnny, Joanne, Fred, and Ed sat in the waiting room while the clock crawled forward. Johnny didn't speak much. He sat with his head in his hands, occasionally standing to pace, then sitting again. This was Johnny Carson, stripped of all performance, all control, all the carefully maintained image. This was just a father waiting to hear if his son would survive. Other people in the waiting room recognized him. A few asked for autographs, which Johnny politely declined. One woman came over and simply said, I'm praying for your family. Johnny nodded, unable to speak. At 4:47 a.m., the surgeon finally emerged. Johnny was on his feet immediately. How is he? He made it through surgery, the doctor said. We've repaired the internal bleeding, set the fractures. The head trauma is our biggest concern. There's significant swelling. We've induced a coma to give his brain time to heal. The next 48 hours are critical. But he could wake up, Johnny asked. He could be okay. It's possible. But Mr. Carson, you need to understand the severity. Even if he wakes up, there could be permanent damage, cognitive issues, motor function problems. We won't know until the swelling goes down. Johnny nodded, processing this information. When can I see him? He's in ICU now. 2 visitors at a time, 10 minutes every hour. Johnny and Joanne went in first. Ricky looked even worse than before, if that was possible. More tubes, more machines, the ventilator still breathing for him. But he was alive. Johnny pulled a chair next to the bed and took Ricky's hand again. He sat there for the full 10 minutes, just holding his son's hand, not saying anything because there was nothing to say that mattered more than just being present. For the next 3 days, Johnny barely left the hospital. He cables The Tonight Show for the entire week, something he'd only done a handful of times in 25 years. The network released a brief statement. Mr. Carson is dealing with a family emergency. The Tonight Show will air reruns this week. Rumors flew, of course. The tabloids ran wild with speculation, but Fred Cordova kept a tight circle around the truth. Only a few trusted people knew that Ricky Carson was fighting for his life in UCLA Medical Center. On day 4, Ricky opened his eyes just for a moment, just long enough to see his father sitting beside the bed. Johnny was holding Ricky's hand, reading the newspaper out loud. Anything to fill the silence. "Dad." Ricky's voice was barely audible, rough from the ventilator. Johnny dropped the newspaper. "Ricky." "Oh God." "Ricky, I'm here. I'm right here. What happened?" "You had an accident, but you're okay. You're going to be okay." Ricky's eyes closed again, but his hand squeezed Johnny's. Just slightly. Just enough. The doctors called it a miracle. Against the odds, Ricky's brain swelling decreased. His cognitive function was intact. He would need months of physical therapy for the fractures, but he would recover fully. 2 weeks after the accident, when Ricky was stable enough to have real conversations, Johnny sat beside his bed. "I need to tell you something," Johnny said. "That fight we had, whatever it was about, it doesn't matter. None of it matters. I spent 3 days thinking you might die, and all I could think was that I'd wasted 3 months being stubborn instead of being your father." Ricky's eyes filled with tears. "I'm sorry too. I know I'm not easy. I know having Johnny Carson as a dad comes with expectations I can't meet." "Stop," Johnny said firmly. "The only expectation I have is that you live, that you're happy, that you know I love you. Everything else is just noise. I love you too, Dad." They held each other carefully because of Ricky's injuries and cried. All the years of distance, of complicated feelings, of expectations and disappointments seemed to dissolve in that hospital room. Johnny returned to The Tonight Show 3 weeks after the accident. He didn't explain what had happened. He just said, "I had a family emergency. Everything's okay now. Thank you for your patience." But the people who were there that night, the audience who saw Fred walk on his stage, the crew who watched Johnny freeze for 11 seconds, the staff who saw him walk out without explanation, they understood that they'd witnessed something profound. They'd seen Johnny Carson lose his composure. They'd seen the moment when being a father became more important than being America's favorite host. Fred Cordova never talked publicly about that night. But years later, in an interview, he said, "I've produced thousands of television shows. I've seen every kind of moment you can imagine, but nothing compared to watching Johnny read that note. In 11 seconds, I watched him transform from Johnny Carson, the performer, to Johnny Carson, the terrified father." It reminded everyone there that behind the desk, behind the jokes, behind the carefully maintained image was a human being who could hurt like anyone else. The unedited footage from that night was kept in NBC's archives. The 11 seconds of silence, Johnny's face going white. The moment he walked off stage, the network offered to show Johnny the footage once in case he wanted it destroyed. Johnny declined. "Keep it," he said. "Maybe someday it'll remind someone that family is more important than television." Ricky Carson recovered fully. He and Johnny rebuilt their relationship over the following years. They had regular dinners, phone calls, visits. The accident had given them something painful but valuable, a second chance. When Johnny Carson retired from The Tonight Show in 1992, Ricky was there in the audience. When Johnny took his final bow, he looked directly at Ricky and mouthed 2 words. "Love you." Ricky mouthed them back. The note that Fred de Cordova handed Johnny on October 23, 1987 contained 19 words. "Ricky car accident, Pacific Coast Highway, UCLA Medical Center. Need to go now?" 19 words that stopped one of television's most controlled performers in his tracks. 19 words that reminded everyone watching that some things are more important than the show must go on. Johnny Carson went silent for 11 seconds that night. But in that silence, he said everything that mattered. He said that family comes first. That vulnerability isn't weakness. That being a father means showing up even when the cameras are rolling. Even when millions are watching. Even when it means walking away from everything you've built. The show always went on for Johnny Carson, except once when it mattered most, when his son needed him. And in that moment, Johnny proved that the man behind the desk was exactly who everyone hoped he would be. Someone who understood that love is more important than laughter and being present is more important than being.